Yes, I do know how to play pinball. In fact, that's why this game disappoints me. Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Epic Pinball, which, as far as PC pinball games go, is one of the best ever made, and still holds up even today. So why do I find it disappointing? Well, let me put it this way. There's a bit of a stereotype out there that video game players and pinball players don't mesh together very well. And being someone who knows how to play real pinball, the reason for this stereotype is pretty simple. You cannot perfectly replicate the feel of a real pinball machine in a computer game. It just doesn't happen. So while Epic Pinball is a great set of pinball tables in its own right, it's not real pinball, nor does it even feel like real pinball. And quite frankly, there isn't a single computer or video game that really gets the experience across. Even pinball machine emulators, which are emulating the real machines, have trouble with this. All that said though, I played the heck out of Epic Pinball when I was younger, but I simply attributed my failures at the game to being inexperienced. However, experience with real pinball has taught me that it wasn't my inexperience that made Epic Pinball hard, it was the overall design and the inaccurate physics and hit detection. And I'll get into a lot more details about this as we get further into the episode. However, I want to stress this again, as far as computerized pinball goes, this is one of the best, so really, you just gotta take what you can get. Epic Pinball was the first game ever developed by Digital Extremes, more famously known for the Unreal Tournament games, and was published through Epic Mega Games in 1993. It's a 1-4-player pinball game, switching dynamically between two different VGA 256 color video modes, 320x200 for the menu system, and 320x240 for the actual gameplay. As for sound support, it supports the PC Speaker, Sound Blaster, Pro Audio Spectrum, and Gravis Ultrasound. Now, typically, with something from Epic Mega Games, you'd think the GUS support would be the best way to go. Unfortunately, GUS support in Epic Pinball is sketchy, often suffering sound dropouts and can even crash the Enigma table, so you're probably better off going with Sound Blaster support. As for its current release state, while it used to be shareware, it's no longer possible to order the full version anymore, nor was there ever a freeware release, so that effectively makes the game commercial now. However, this is one of those games that was primarily distributed as packs, with each pack containing 4 tables, so if you wanted all 12 of the original tables, you needed to buy all 3 packs. This eventually led to all kinds of different versions out there being distributed by different people with different sets of tables. Or there was even a company that sold boxed copies of individual tables, which is just plain weird. Finding the original pack discs is next to impossible. In fact, I've long since lost mine, but copies of the complete collection on CD are still floating around. Just avoid eBay. Normally eBay is my first choice for this kind of stuff, but the prices for anything related to Epic Pinball on eBay are typically over $20, whereas on Amazon you can literally find copies of the complete collection for just a few dollars. Also, because I don't have the complete collection CD, I don't have the 13th table. But I'm told that the 13th table is kinda sucky anyways, so I don't really think I'm missing much. While we're on the topic though, one last thing to mention is that in 2011, a remake of Epic Pinball was released for iOS devices called Retro Pinball, which has updated visuals and includes 3 tables by default: Super Android, Crash and Burn, and Pangea. There's also an option in the game itself to purchase 7 more tables, giving you 10 of the original 12 in total. The only 2 tables missing completely from this remake are Jungle Pinball and Enigma. Jungle Pinball is likely missing because of its relation to Jill of the Jungle, which Digital Extremes doesn't own the rights to, while Enigma uses extreme amounts of palette cycling, which would make it extraordinarily difficult to transfer into a modern graphics API. So there's actually not a lot of general things to say about the gameplay, since there's 12 different tables to cover and each one has its own considerations. Though there are a few things I can say in general that covers the scope of the entire program. The first being that each table keeps its own high scores and its own options for how many balls to play with, as well as an extremely important setting for the table's angle. Now, the theory is that the lower the angle of the table, the slower the ball goes, and thus the easier the table becomes. That's the theory. In practice, changing the angle of a real pinball table completely changes the dynamics of the game, as certain holes, ramps, and lanes will suddenly become much easier or much harder for the ball to reach. All of the tables in Epic Pinball haven't really been designed with proper angle considerations in mind, so rather than have a good optimal angle set for each table, it's up to the player to set the angle they feel is appropriate. To that end, as I go through each individual table, I'll also make recommendations as to which angles you should be playing with. As for the choice between 3 and 5 balls, this is sort of a matter of preference. If these were real pinball machines in an arcade setting, or if you're playing competitively against other people, I would say 3 ball would be the best approach. 5 ball is better for longer solo games being played in a non-competitive or in a non-monetary setting, so I typically play with 5 balls instead of 3 for that reason. Other than that, you have controls for the flippers, for nudging the table, and the forwards nudge button also acts for pulling the plunger. You can hit the enter key to turn off the scoreboard at the bottom so you can see more of what you're doing. And while the ball's stationary, you can use the up and down arrow keys to scroll the playfield so you can take a better look at it. And yeah, that's all there really is to say in general, so now let's talk about the tables themselves. The first table on display is Super Android, originally just called Android. And when the game was updated to version 2.0 and the third table pack was released, Android got a makeover with new music and a couple new table mechanics, thus becoming Super Android. This is actually one of the better tables on display, so it's no wonder it was the one players got for free with the shareware version. That said, it's also one of the more linear tables, as progressing in it simply comes down to hitting the middle left ramp to find out what you're supposed to be doing, then going and doing it. The far left ramp and far right hole are extremely difficult to intentionally hit, and sort of highlights a running theme you're going to see throughout all of these tables. Things that are far too difficult to hit given the physics. As for the angle, this is one of the few tables I recommend playing with a normal angle, as most of these tables are either best with a high angle or a low angle. One big tip I can also give you guys is to give the table a nudge anytime the ball's right inside that tiny transitional gap from the bumper area to the main playfield, because if you don't, the ball will occasionally head straight for the drain. Next up is Pot of Gold, which is kind of a whimsical table with some whimsical music to go with it. Centered around the idea of rainbows and leprechauns and such, this table's fairly straightforward, but the cave on the left side is virtually impossible to get the ball into intentionally. I recommend playing this table with a low angle, specifically because the higher the angle is, the more likely the hit detection for the hole in the center will fail. Plus, the more likely balls will fall down the outlanes because of the way they've been designed. Next up is Excalibur, an old school table that's all about racking up points while alternating hidden targets on the left and right in order to spell the word Excalibur down the sword in the middle of the table. This is a very difficult table regardless of your angle setting, but at the same time, ball losses on this table are typically going to be your own fault and won't be related to the outlanes, as the ball will rarely go down them compared to the other tables. I actually recommend playing this table with a high angle, because you'll need the extra power the flippers get with the higher angle settings to really rack up the points. This also happens to be my second most favorite table, specifically because of its overall presentation, and the fact that the difficulty isn't related to losing the ball for stupid reasons every now and then. Next up is Crash and Burn, which is again a highly difficult table, but this time because of how fast-paced it is and how easy it is to lose track of the ball. It's centered around the idea of car racing and actually has a number of similarities to a real pinball machine called F1 Grand Prix, produced in 1987, including the part where the ball launches into the middle of the playfield rather than into the top. I highly recommend playing this table with a high angle, since on the lower angle settings, there's a much greater chance that when you launch the ball, it'll go straight for the left out lane. And if the out lanes didn't give you 500,000 points on this table, this wouldn't be a big deal, since all of these tables will actually allow a non-scoring ball to be played again. But as it stands, this is a serious flaw with this table design. One really cool thing though is that the ramp on the left actually measures how fast the ball is going, and this is used for the multi-ball feature later in. This happens to be my favorite table in the entire game, despite its flaws. Next up is Magic, which is definitely the most retro table on display here. It's incredibly basic in its design and has very low score amounts, as well as some fittingly retro yet annoying music to go with it. Really, there's not much to do on this table beyond just racking up the points, which isn't to say the table's bad or anything. I mean, that's how it was for the older pinball tables once the flippers were added to the mix and the gambling aspects died out. As for the angle, I recommend a normal or a high angle. Playing on a low angle will actually make it easier for the ball to go down the out lanes, so I don't recommend it. Next up is Jungle Pinball, based on Jill of the Jungle, another game made by Epic Mega Games, which I still have yet to review on the show since I don't own it yet. Now, I gotta be honest here, while I like the presentation of this table, I don't particularly like the overall design. It's incredibly hard to get the ball to go where you want it to on this table because of where everything is positioned. Overall, it feels like it could have used a bit more design effort, or better physics. In any case, I don't actually have an angle recommendation for this table because it doesn't get any easier or harder with any of the different settings. So for this one, you can pick your overall preferred angle. Next we have Deep Sea, which is actually very similar to the Android table in terms of overall design, though with some obvious differences. This table is also more centered around on dealing with various events than trying to accomplish a particular goal. A lot of people love this table, but I find it's only average because, just like Android, it has a couple really difficult holes you gotta hit. I recommend playing this table with a low angle simply because the slower speed fits the overall theme of the table better. But really, this is another table that really doesn't change much with the different angle settings. The last of the original 8 tables is Enigma, which at first glance looks extremely simplistic, but the gimmick is that the table pops up various obstacles and interactions as you play through its various levels. Kinda like it's merging pinball and video games together. To be frank though, it comes across as being overly difficult since there are numerous targets you'll encounter as you play through that are either incredibly difficult to hit because of their position, or they destroy your ball on contact, meaning you have to avoid hitting them entirely. The difficulty of this table really isn't affected much by the table's angle, so again, choose whichever angle you feel comfortable with. This brings us into the last 4 tables, which weren't originally released at the same time as the original 8 tables, and weren't exactly designed with the same considerations in mind. To that end, the last 4 tables have a completely different feel to them, and they also don't feel nearly as well designed as the rest. The first of these 4 is also somewhat controversial, Cybergirl. This table is often considered to just be a less polished version of Android, though it really does have its own different feel, especially considering Android was centered around bringing an Android to life, while Cybergirl is more about computer hacking. However, listen to that music for a moment. Sound familiar? It's essentially a remix of Oh Yeah, a very unique song made by the Swiss band Yellow in 1985, and has been used in quite a number of movies and TV shows like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, American Pie, heck, it's even been used in The Simpsons. Worse still, I don't recall seeing a music credit for this anywhere in the game's credits or documentation, which kind of makes me question how original some of the other music in this game might be. In any case, Cybergirl isn't too technical or challenging of a table, but it is really difficult to hit the 10-stack hole on the bottom left. And just to drive the point home how badly these last 4 tables have been made, this is probably the best of them, yet it has physics glitches, such as the ball occasionally not being able to properly plunge into the field, and just dropping back down onto the plunger. I recommend a normal angle for this table, though really, it plays fairly well with any angle. Next up is Pangea, which is centered around dinosaurs and events related to them. This is actually kind of a boring table since there's little to do and most of the action takes place around the top and the edges with lots of empty space in the middle. You really got to play this table with a low angle too, since the ball will easily fall down the outlanes if you don't. Now these last two tables are probably the worst of the bunch in terms of overall design. The first of these being Space Journey, which is incredibly difficult for all the wrong reasons. This table's a mess, with it being very hard to tell where the ball can and can't go since so much of it is obscured by raised elements. And worse still, look at the top left of that ramp there. See how it goes perfectly horizontal like that? Ever wonder why pinball tables never have perfectly horizontal elements anywhere on them? Because friction can bring the ball to a stop and get it completely stuck, short of tilting the machine, which would be a generally bad idea. Suffice to say, this is not a well-designed table, which is sad because I really like the music for it. And if you're going to play it though, you absolutely need to play it with a low angle, otherwise you're going to find it nearly impossible to get the ball up any of the ramps. And the last table, Toy Factory, isn't much better design-wise than Space Journey. In fact, one feature of this table that's going to infuriate everyone who tries it is that the flippers are spaced rather far apart from each other, meaning it's incredibly easy to lose the ball down the drain. Now, if you look closely, it seems as though there's supposed to be a pin there to help keep the ball from doing that. But that's actually a good segue for the next thing I want to talk about. Still, if you want to play this table, any angle will do because no matter what angle you play with, you're going to run into problems getting the ball to go where you want it to. Now, to be fair, Epic Pinball comes pretty close to having spot-on pinball physics, but doesn't quite make the cut. Now let's talk about one of the more obvious problems right off the bat. There's no sideways nudging. Yes, I am aware that there are keys you can use to nudge the table from the left or the right. They don't work. They just nudge the table forwards. The reason this is a big deal is because there's different reasons why you would want to nudge the table forwards as opposed to sideways. A forwards nudge is mostly useful for keeping the ball from entering a narrow path you don't want it to go through, or for slowing the ball down while it's traveling through such a path, thus changing its ultimate trajectory. You can also use a forwards nudge to bounce the ball off of the top of a stationary object, or if it happens to be running near some bumpers, a forwards nudge is a good way to get the ball to actually hit a bumper and start racking up some extra points. However, sideways nudges have their own purposes. The two I find most useful is to get the ball to deflect off of a wall that it's riding along the edge of, and the second trick is quite a bit trickier to pull off, but guarantees you'll save your ball from going down the drain when you succeed. While the ball is heading straight for the drain, you nudge the table towards the opposite direction the ball is heading in, and hit the appropriate flipper at the same time. Sometimes followed immediately by the other flipper depending on how the ball bounces. This is referred to as a slap save, and is an incredibly useful trick to learn. But since sideways nudges don't do what they're supposed to here in Epic Pinball, you can't perform either of these maneuvers, and believe me, I've tried. Another problem with the physics is that it's extremely hard to perform backhand shots. Basically, a backhand shot is when you use the left flipper to send the ball down the path or hole on the left side of the table, or the right flipper for a path or hole on the right side. In theory, this would make some of the holes and ramps on some of these tables much easier to get to, but getting a backhand shot to work at all is nearly impossible on these tables. Now, it can be done, but the physics in play just make it needlessly difficult to pull off. One thing with the physics that isn't really obvious until you try doing some flipper passes is that gravity doesn't seem to be handled properly. Ironically, gravity is one of the easiest concepts in physics to program into a video game. You just have to apply constant downward acceleration. It's one of the simplest things to do, and yet it doesn't quite work that way here. Now, this really is just a minor thing, but just trust me on this one. Watch the ball on a real pinball machine for a while, then watch the ball here in Epic Pinball. And yeah, you'll agree something weird is going on with the gravity. It's almost as though the gravity is not being applied in a linear fashion like it should be. Anyways, that's all the main physics problems beyond, not being able to actually manhandle a real machine. No, there's one last problem with the gameplay, and this is actually more of a bug than anything else. The hit detection. Now don't get me wrong, the hit detection works fairly well for anything solid. So that would be things like the ramps and the walls and the flippers and the bumpers, stuff like that. Anything not solid, however, that's where the hit detection fails. You'll often find the ball will hit something like a drop target, yet bounce right off of it without actually triggering the drop target. and this is because of the way the hit detection and the movement has been programmed. And because of the fact that drop targets aren't actually solid, it's the wall behind them that's solid. A great example of this are the large vertical arrays of drop targets on the Crash and Burn and Jungle pinball tables. You can literally hit the entire bank of drop targets in a single go since they're not actually solid objects, so the ball just rides along the wall and triggers them all in rapid succession. The Enigma table is especially bad for this since everything on the table is a non-solid object that the ball could just pass right by. Overall, despite its flaws, Epic Pinball remains one of the better PC pinball games ever created. From a presentation standpoint, it really stands out with a great variety of music, visuals, and table designs, even if some of those designs are a bit impractical or annoying. From a gameplay perspective, it's no replacement for the real thing, and there's quite literally nothing that can truly replicate the experience of real pinball. The funny thing is, this puts Epic Pinball in a really strange position where the only people who are really going to enjoy it are people who are only casually interested in pinball, since people with no interest in pinball aren't going to see the point, and people who already are pinball wizards are just going to take one test run of this thing and wonder why the physics are so broken. In short, it is what it is, take it or leave it. DOSBox configuration is super simple, just set cycles to max and you're good to go. Interestingly enough, the game will also work fine with the auto cycle setting, it's just the loading times will be longer, that's all. Anywho, that's all for episode 130 of Ancient DOS Games. Next week's a filler, and I've got a bit of a nostalgia trip planned for everyone, so make sure to tune in next Saturday if you really want to go back to the past and see a bunch of things I'll bet a lot of you forgot ever existed.